What do you see coming from your Timberwolves headed into next season?
Where do I start? Where's the propaganda start? Because top four seed in the West is where I start here. And this is the requirements. Obviously, we know that Anthony Edwards is a great player. We expect him to take that superstar leap this season. Even though the media wants him to go to LA or whatever. But in my opinion, as soon as he makes that superstar leap, that's when we take that jump as a team into that contender tier. And if Rudy Gobert can, stay healthy, play well, he doesn't have to be like Utah Jazz form, but just like 80% of that. And I like our chances being a top 4 seed in the West.
Top four. I don't know if they're cut out for all that yet, man. I would probably have to see just them prove it a little bit more as a unit, the way they played together, especially. Last season was really supposed to be that building foundational year where all these pieces started to come together. And because Karl-Anthony Towns missed so much time, we didn't really get a whole lot of that. Now, they're in a place where they definitely can experiment with that. There's room to grow. For a while, a lot of people thought Karl-Anthony Towns was going to be on the way out. But now we do know that it seems like they're interested in having him around for the foreseeable future. So they got some stuff to make work. But I think a lot of these guys, they're old enough. From a certain perspective, we got a certain guy here who thinks their coaching is elite. So maybe he can figure some things out there. But there's a couple teams that I just think might be a little bit better. If I look at this Western Conference, I think Denver's a better team. I think the Lakers are a better team. I would give the Kings the benefit of the doubt over them just because of what they did last season. I think the Suns are a better team, at least in the regular season. I think a team like Minnesota could prove to be a little bit deeper in the playoffs because Phoenix struggles there. And then you have other teams like the Warriors and the Clippers. So I think if they do manage to pull off a top 4 seed, it's in a situation where they significantly outperform expectations. Not saying it's impossible, but I would not be predicting that.
That's a good point. But I also want to mention that I really like Minnesota and what they have. And you said the playoff performance stuff. But that also goes to these other teams, like for the Lakers, for example. I think of them as a team that's going to make the playoffs more than likely next year. But I don't think they're going to be a top 5 seed in the West just because they're going to kind of coast and then, turn it up in the playoffs, kind of like they did last year. So that's how I feel about the Lakers and probably also the Clippers as well.
Yeah, I can see that more so about the Clippers, but I'm pretty high on the Lakers going into this season. And I think they even show, like we talked last week about how like LeBron missed a lot of time, but they were still like one of the best, if not the best team in the second half of the season. So I feel like with their improvements in the offseason, they'll be a lot better regular season wise. Top 4 seed, I mean, I don't think it's like out of the realm of possibility, but it obviously depends a lot on Anthony Edwards taking like that superstar jump, which going into year 4 is definitely on the table. But he has to be that like he has to be the guy for this team, every single night. And we've seen like subtle inconsistencies like the start seasons over the last couple of years, but he has to be that guy from day one this season. I think he has it in him, but then it's like the supporting cast. Can Rudy and Cat coexist for a full season? Can they both stay healthy? How is Mike Conley going to hold up because he's an older guy? How is the rest of the supporting cast, the guys that they brought in? Is it Shake Milton going to be able to produce off the bench? There's just kind of a lot of questions. That's why I'm like top 4 seed kind of sounds a little crazy. And the West is just so deep and so talented that Ant's going to have to really take a huge jump this season for the Timberwolves to reach that kind of status.
So let me ask you this, though. If Anthony Edwards gets to the point where he becomes a superstar, but the supporting cast is just not there, and it's like the Cat Gobert thing isn't working out, they gave up all these assets, now you have McDaniels locked into a lot of money. If he jumps into superstar status, does he jump out of Minnesota?
No. I'll just keep it as that. He wouldn't sign a 5-year extension if he didn't want to stay in Minnesota. And I would also add that the fact is he said this multiple times on record, on air. He said he loves Minnesota, loves the vibe, loves the crowd, loves everything about it. And he wants to stay here in Minnesota for the foreseeable future. Am I going to say he's a career lifer in Minnesota? No, because as we've seen with Damian Lillard, for example, the person that we all said needs to run from the grind eventually ran from the grind. So if it continues in Minnesota eventually does not make the promised land, or for whatever reason they drop out of playoff contention completely, I could see him leaving at some point, maybe 6 years down the road, or 6 years down the road when his contract is up and he says, I need a new home. Could that happen? Sure. Do I think it's going to happen? No. But as of right now, the big fish in the small pond situation just doesn't work. And I bring up the example of the Bulls weren't doing anything prior to Michael Jordan. And I'm not going to say Anthony Edwards is Michael Jordan, but what I am saying is that these mid-market, teams need a superstar level player to bump them up to a higher level market. And we saw that with Golden State, especially with Stephen Curry. They were always a mid-market team. And now you have these top, these really rich people. They're selling out crowds. Rich people are paying top dollar to go and watch these special players. And as I said, they were a mid-market at one point, but you need one or two special players to really change your organization around. And I think Anthony Edwards is at least one of those players. Can we get a second one? Is Cat, is Rudy, is Jaden that second guy? I don't know quite yet. And I don't think Cat or Rudy is. Does Jaden develop to become that guy? Probably not. But there's always the future of potentially getting that second caliber, that second tier player, like a Jaylen Brown type of player that you can put next to Anthony Edwards and really make your market value skyrocket as a community. And as a player, putting that whole community on the map is the best thing I could imagine doing for a team.
Well said. Very well said. I think at the place where he's at now, it is still so young into his career that there is so much time for so many different things to unfold. I think the only thing that really makes it a big concern is the fact that the core they put around him is just a little bit older. You think the main acquisition being a Rudy Gobert, who is 31 years old, and it's like the timetable for Anthony Edwards should just be getting started. They shouldn't even be close to a championship window yet, because you got to think, when do star players enter their prime? Usually between like 26 to 28. So he should not be close to that yet. There should be a lot of room to grow. And I do think Anthony Edwards, once he gets to that point, can be a Devin Booker, a Jason Tatum level player, maybe even a little bit higher at the peak of his peak, because we know some of those guys haven't even reached their peak yet. But with that said, we know they just cashed in a ton for a player who's not getting any younger. And so when you have a timeline like that, it does make it a little bit shaky of like, are they trying to compete for a championship right now, or are they trying to build for the future? And that's what kind of puts them in a weird position to me. Now, can they go ahead and get the job done, and can they win a lot in the near future? Yes, but I think it puts them in a chance where everybody's not going to be playing their best basketball at the same time.
That's the scary truth behind this whole situation. As a Timberwolves fan, you want to root for Rudy Gobert and to be a successful player, but at the same time, if Rudy Gobert does not, really up his production from last year, or if Anthony Edwards does now reach that superstar level next year, as you said, then you're wondering, are we going to be able to get these guys on the same caliber, their top tier playing ability with each other? And I don't know. That's the biggest question. I don't know.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting scenario going forward, because long term they still have enough pieces. I mean, Ant's obviously young. Jaden McDaniels is still young. If Cat's around long term, of course, we don't know what's going to happen yet as we enter next summer when Ant, Gobert, and Cat are all on their big deals. But if Cat is around long term, obviously he's not as young as Ant and McDaniels, but he's still going to be around for a while as long as he wants to remain in Minnesota. So there's still an avenue for you guys to be competitive for a while. It's just a matter of how good is that trio and where do you get your depth at this point? Because obviously we've mentioned losing all those assets. Part of that is the fact that you don't have any trades to make for the most part. You also just are going to find it a lot harder to add depth, because Minnesota, at least for the time being, unless, like you say, Anthony Edwards and another guy just really starts to elevate the notoriety of the Timberwolves as a market in the NBA, they're not going to attract a lot of high caliber free agents. So if they can keep drafting well like they did this year, at least seemingly with Leonard Miller, and you can keep bringing in guys like that, they might be able to stay afloat and have good enough depth. But that's going to be another thing that could end up being problematic down the road, is those guys just start to shuffle out the door year over year. It might become hard to replace those guys. Hopefully you can continue to retain guys like a Naz Reid, and because those guys are going to be really important and hard to come by now over the next few years. But there's still avenues to be good long term. But like you mentioned, Gabe, having Rudy now, trading for him, it does make the timeline a little bit more interesting. ultimately they just need to be competitive enough with him on the roster to continue to extend their window and make it so it is a scenario where in 3, 4, 5 years you don't get to a point where Ant's asking out, and instead he might actually have interest in signing that supermax deal.
Yeah, it's kind of like a two-edged sword for real, because that's showing that they're willing to do what it takes to try and get better. But it's also the difficulty of like mixing guys that are on vastly different timelines. Like when they made that trade, Anthony Edwards was going into year 3. He hadn't even ascended into being an all-star caliber player yet. So it's kind of like difficult to do that when Rudy's like a over age 30 center. Definitely like the decline is definitely on the way just because of the type of player that he is. It's tough doing that. But then, like I said to begin, like it's showing that they're willing to do what it takes to put talent around Anthony Edwards. They believe in Anthony Edwards to be that franchise guy. And they believe that after his first playoff series, they were bought in like this can be our guy that we can build, a hopeful championship team around. So, definitely just hopefully, like you said, Jelson, like hopefully Rudy can up his production a little bit, Cat stay healthy so we can at least see what these 3 guys and the rest of the supporting cast can be with a full season under their belts, because they didn't really get a lot of time together. And then they were just kind of thrown out there in the playoffs. And despite it being a 5-game series, they were pretty competitive with the Denver Nuggets. So I just want to see what they can look like for a full season. And maybe, Chris Finch, I think he is a solid head coach. Maybe he can make this work running Rudy and Cat together with Anthony Edwards being the featured guy.
I'll get your thoughts quick here, Jelson, for the Timberwolves fan. Big window more season coming?
No. No. And I will say this. Garrett only brought this up because he met Wendell Moore, but also Wendell Moore hasn't shown to me enough to get minutes on this team, even with your backup point guard realistically being Jordan McLaughlin, who is awful. But you're still like Wendell Moore has shown the defensive upside, but until he can actually make a shot, period, he's not going to get minutes. He'll get some minutes, but they'll be in blowout situations or situations where you just need a lockdown defender, and that's just about it. And I think he's going to step into that Josh Okogie role from a couple of years ago, where he's like just not a great defensive player, but if you need to stop and that's all you need, you put the guy in, and he gets to play some solid defense. But I like the propaganda. So I'll give you that, Garrett.
Propaganda is always wonderful. I feel like this season for them is going to be the Ant show overall. Like, you might see some other guys make some improvements, most notably Nickeil Alexander-Walker having his most improved player campaign. But
Yes,
to this point, Anthony Edwards is a 28 points per game playoff performer, has only upped his scoring averages and his all-around game and his consistency throughout the regular season every year. The other guys around him have a lot to figure out, but one thing that I'm very confident in, and I think all of us are confident in because we just had this discussion only like 2 weeks ago here on the pod when we were doing our shooting guard rankings. A year from now, we could be talking about Anthony Edwards in that conversation with Devin Booker for the best shooting guard in the league. And if you have a player who's the best at their position or in conversations for the best at their position on your roster, you should be a pretty damn good regular season team. It's very rare that you have a guy that's in that like top 2-3 echelon and the team does not end up performing. So whether or not we get a Rudy Gobert playoff drop-off like we saw in Utah, or we get a Karl Anthony Towns playoff stinker again like we've seen him do a couple times, at the end of the day, when projecting the regular season, I do feel like there is enough there. So if they're at full strength, they should be good. It's just a very, very competitive Western Conference, but I think they're right there in the mix. And personally, I have aesthetic bias. So a player as flashy as Anthony Edwards, who mixed with, I love the color scheme of the Timberwolves jerseys. The more I get to see them show out, I'm not complaining. My eggs are in the Eastern Conference basket because that's where my favorite team plays. So if they want to go and make noise in the West, hey, that's fine by me.
And I like how you brought up having like the top tier player, but especially having a top tier player and like one of the best at a premium position, not just a position, but a premium position. Because we talked about this earlier, Gabe. Having Karl Anthony Towns be the best center in the league in 2016 is not the same caliber as being the best shooting guard in the league in 2023-24. You got a guy that's hopefully going to be a top 2 or 3 guy in the league at his position, at a premium position. And that's what I love to see. That's what I hope to see, honestly.
That's a good point, man. Just want to see him this is the year. Like, we see a lot of young stars. Like, I don't know why. I just feel like his career trajectory just reminds me a lot of Jason Tatum's. And I feel like this year 4 can be like, this is where like the real like superstar discussions can start for Anthony Edwards. And, hopefully we can see him like lock in defensively, become like an all defensive caliber guard. Because I think he has that in his game. I just want to see that for a full, 82 games or whatever. So, it's exciting, man. Like Gabe mentioned, Nickeil Alexander-Walker is going to have a much improved year. I think he kind of found his way in the playoffs. So, hopefully his confidence is up. But for me, man, it's just I really want to see if they can make these bigs work, because last offseason I bought into it, and I still think it can work to an extent. Maybe not as high as I had last year, like when I thought they could be like the best team in the Western Conference, but I still think it can be productive. Maybe not top 4, but maybe to where they can avoid the play-in for the first time in the last couple of years.
Yeah, I mean, it's honest. It's a tough situation. But what I would say is that, I think we all can agree here that usually if you get a big trade going on, it usually takes about a season for the players to acclimate and get into the system and really get a vibe for what you're trying to do on a team. And am I as high as I was, coming into the season? Probably not. But I was also unrealistically high on the Timberwolves coming into last season. So I don't know. Honestly, Devin, we've heard your takes on Rudy Gobert, but I don't think I've heard your opinions on like the whole too big situation. Like, what do you think about it? Do you think it's going to work? And like, do you think that this could be a top 4 type of caliber team with these 2 players?
He was bought in a year ago.
I was bought in a year ago. I had him as a 1 seed a year ago, but I don't know if I can put him there quite yet going into this year. I still need to see a little bit more from Cat and Gobert. Of course, they didn't have anywhere near as much time as we would have hoped to have them have last year. But like we mentioned earlier, there's just a lot of teams in the West that they have a chance to still be a top 4 seed, because I think there's going to be, especially probably from 5, 6, 7, 9, 10, there's probably only going to be a few games in between. It's going to be a tight Western Conference, so you could probably make an argument for them being at 5 or 4, and you can probably make an argument for them being at 8 or 9, and it's probably only going to be a few wins in the difference. If all goes well, if they stay healthy and takes a bit of a leap, I can see them being a 4 seed. But I think a lot of things are going to have to go well. I wouldn't be surprised if the Lakers and the Suns have to have some injury problems for that to happen, because I think those 2 teams are better. I think Denver's comfortably better. I think the fact that the Warriors were without arguably their second best player for the majority of last season and had an anomaly on the road should count them in for being much better this year. So there's a lot of factors in that Western Conference, but there's just so many good teams. It's very possible that they end up in that top 4 seed range, but I think it's much more likely they are just, again, kind of fighting in and around just being out of the play-in tournament and hoping to get out of it. But I think they will be better suited for the postseason this year, assuming they stay healthy. A bit more experience. Of course, having McDaniels back would help. Have a year of Cat and Gobert, hopefully both healthy. They should be better suited for that, but I still think top 4 might be a little bit much, even though, like we said, I did have them as a 1 seed last year.
If it really is the Ant show as much as we think, maybe being in the competitive conference helps them out, because, listen, just imagine the agendas and the takes you will hear if they're in this super close conference, in these super close games against Sacramento and Memphis and Golden State. In the last 5 minutes of the game, this dude wearing number 5 comes out of nowhere and he just takes over and he closes out the game. Now, that's superstar shit. And if we're expecting the superstar leap from him, listen, if they're taking some of those close games, that's really the difference maker. And when you have a guy like that as your closer, I'm not going to say that I'm not confident in you. Now, the guy on the other side of the court might be Steph Curry or Ja Morant or Luka Doncic or De'Aaron Fox, the clutch player of the year. But Anthony Edwards, he has a chance. He has a chance. So I can't count them out for anything. I cannot count them out for anything. I'll count them out for a championship, but I won't count them out for that much less.
A championship season incoming?
I forgot he switched his number to 5.
I almost said
forgot
one.
about that.
I almost said one, and I like have
5.
I
Plus, I'm
wouldn't
seeing
have
the one in
corrected
the
you.
background. I'm like, that's crazy.
Yeah, I wouldn't even have corrected you because it's like I also kind of got the change to number 5, but yeah.
Jeez, maybe he's about to get.
I guess I just know more Timberwolves than you guys do, but
Okay.
that's just
Bro's
me,
an
though.
undercover
That's just me.
Wolves fan now.
What,
I'm
real
a-
Timberwolves fan? Or?
Conference team.
Listen, if Jelson's allowed to be an undercover Cincinnati Reds fan, I have to reciprocate the love. You know what I'm saying?
Hey, undercover Cincinnati Reds fan, and I'm an undercover Celtics fan. So
Oh,
Yes,
no.
he is.
Oh,
Yes, he is.
no.
My guy.
Tyrik does have him winning the trophy though.
let's go.
Win is a win,
man.
I like this. I like this narrative. Another play-in.
A win is a win.